So we've done kind of an initial set of blocking for our still life piece. Next, we're going to try to get some more of the details in. Maybe again, I'm gonna choose some colors that I think are appropriate for this piece. I actually like the idea of using this blue, maybe made into even more of a gray. We're gonna add yet one more layer, and we're going to try to get those in here for any of these greens. I'm going to try at this point to get most of my blocking in such a way that I think it's going to be easier to paint. So trying to not add too many details here, and I am converging some of the values that I'm using. So for all of these grays, I might even think about these later. I think all of this stuff is going to be like a real final layer. So I don't want to actually go too crazy here. There is a certain point in painting where you have to kind of transcend the time that you've chosen to do blocking and then the time that you've chosen to then add in details and rendering. And for something like this down here, you could potentially block in all of this as your foliage color and then come back over it with your background color that you've done and kind of cut out all of the little edges and things and find like where there are stems and open up some of the viewer's eye beyond what you've seen. But I think for this, I'm actually gonna paint most of it in the foreground rather than doing that strategy of painting the background over the foreground. So I do want to get most of my foliage in here. Let's see here. This I am gonna block in all the way. I'm gonna block all of this stuff in here. And this isn't a practice. This is much easier to paint when I go approach the painting as an oil painting. So rather than trying to paint back and forth between the foreground and the background, any of this stuff that I've painted, and I know that I'm gonna need to like bring in the background with my background color, I don't wanna have to do that too many times. I only wanna do that in strategic spots. So for something like this gray that I've painted here, I can worry about that because this is a pretty big block, but I'm not gonna do that, for instance, over here, because I could just paint those on over the fact because there are more fine details of the painting. Next, I want to get in some of this dark value. And I missed a couple spots. These I would also probably opt for painting the dark value on last because they are individual small details and rendering. So again, I'm trying to do mostly blocking at this point. I'm gonna let this lily just also be this dark color because I think it's not important in the scope of my composition. So any of the dark stuff that's sitting way in the background, I'm just gonna use the process of simplification and say it's all the same color and that's cool by me. Double check for anything that is in the light here. We have a leaf that's in the light here. This leaf is actually a little bit darker, but I think I'm gonna let it be in the light just because it gives a little bit more of an interesting visual. And then again, I've got a lot of little dark bits, or sorry, little light bits that I will be painting over the top much later. Now we're going to address our lilies here. So what I think I'm gonna do is choose, again, a yellow that I think is gonna be really kind of washed out actually. And I'm gonna get rid of this here, painting as broadly as possible. I'm gonna let the closed lilies be primarily white. That is a closed lily. We're gonna just let that be white. And there are some interesting edges in here. Like this, there's a dark value that sits right here for something that is like a dark red here, as opposed to our foliage colors, which we've covered up primarily, but like say like this dark. I could certainly just simplify and say that we're gonna use our dark value here. So I'm actually gonna add one more layer underneath this stuff. And any of these darks are just going to be dark in their entirety. Come back into white here. Not exactly the white that I was using. And we're going to do that on this same layer that I said was over the top. So here is what we are looking like in terms of a more near finished painting. This is about the point where I would consider beginning to actually paint this, because at this point I can very readily hop between the layers that I know will be easy to paint. So I might start and get ahead of my dry times by choosing something like this, where I can say I have plenty of blocking available to me that I'm going to need to spot check in the days to come. But I like to make sure that I do this in a way where my dry times are planned, and anytime that I want to add in some more complex details, like all of this, I probably would actually even start sketching this on and making sure that I am doing it in proportion to my actual painting. So I'm pretty satisfied with how this is looking so far. There are quite a few like problem areas, like what's going on here, we don't really know. Do we have any other foliage, interesting things happening over here? I know for a fact that there's more of this shadow that's a little bit softer over here and over here. And then we have a lot of eucalyptus up here as well. I'm gonna see what happens when we try to add some nice lines here for our bloomed lily. I believe we already had quite a bit of white. So we're gonna just take a quick peek and see how this looks. So that did something for this painting, but it didn't do that much for this painting. So next I'm gonna consider, okay, what about inside of the lily that might be interesting? And we're going to, again, maybe consider that we've got some greens or something in here. For green, I'm just gonna actually use maybe a cooler yellow, or potentially adding something in the inside here. I like to always just kind of spot check to see how this looks, if I've made this painting more interesting. And I do think that already there are some things about this that are coming to life. I kind of want to accentuate this yellow because I know that I'm going to use that a lot more in the more finished painting. But I think the other thing that we can consider is that we have an interesting focal point between this as kind of the main player here. This should be maybe a little bit less detailed, and then kind of working our detail from here to here. So we've got like a lot of detail in the vase, a lot of detail in this, less detail here, and then less detail throughout really the rest of the piece. And in doing that, I try to generally follow the 70-30 principle of saying, okay, what elements are rendered and what elements are crude. It kind of has a nice mix of some amount of details, like we've had details here, we have some details here, but it's not the majority of the painting, where most of it is actually quite crude. We've got all this stuff, we've got this that's kind of crude, this is kind of crude. Let's continue for the sake of seeing where we get with this painting. So the next thing I actually want to consider is the fact that we have our shadow layer. I'm going to add over the top something that is not quite the shadow. It's a little bit brighter, a little bit more toward the yellow that we use. Add just some slight splotches of color as we've got these shadows over here. Got a shadow back here. We have a really interesting shadow that's up here. Interesting shadow back here as well that I mentioned before. Let's try and see what we did with our eucalyptus here. So let's take this color and then again kind of on the top, because I'm considering that when I paint this, I'm going to paint this, then this, then this, not this, this goes away, then this, and so on. So I'm doing this in a way where eventually I will probably choose a stopping point and say, right from the jump, I'm only going to paint this, and that's great. Maybe I actually will finish this out and really make sure, but I know that a bunch of stuff is going to go over this, so I don't want to waste paint in doing that. But we're going to just continue in this kind of upward trend as we continue to paint. So these are going to sit over the top. Again, we've done these. These look pretty good to me. Maybe we want that nice clean line here. And again, if we want to do the dark line for the eucalyptus that's in the shadow, we can do that as well. I like to alternate some of my light value and my dark value. We're going to take this dark value that we've been using. We're going to block that in here. I think that should actually be something that we paint underneath, because it'll be a lot easier to generally paint the light value over the top of it. And if we've done any amount of painting our lily, which we probably won't by this point, I want to make sure that I am not covering over it. Let's take a look at what this looks like. So here is more of our completed painting, and there are always ways to check and see, okay, did I do the thing that is completed? And to me, this is looking pretty good. I do think that there are elements that we could work on. I think that fundamentally, I don't love our background color that we chose. So I'm actually going to wash over that in maybe actually more of a bluish color. I'll talk much further about pigment selection in a future video. The main gist of this is that we generally want to adhere to some unified colors. Don't choose way too many pigments for your painting. It always makes it much easier if you say, yep, I've got a limited palette and I'm sticking with that limited palette. I like what I've chosen. I think this is pretty compelling for a painting. This actually, the fact that we made this blue our background sort of mutes the fact that we're using a similar blue for this vase, and that's okay in my opinion. I know that there's a highlight here, and this is where I might honestly get a little bit wild and rogue here. If there's a highlight in this vase somewhere here, I like to always work on these facets in this vase, so I'm gonna actually bring the opacity on this down. I'm just gonna add some lines in here that I know I'm going to do with more fidelity. I think that honestly would be a great painting. I would be really happy to paint this and work on this. There are some elements like right here that I'm not totally clear on what's going on, but probably when I paint them, I'm gonna just cover over those. We can use all of this as an opportunity to learn when we are doing our full oil painting. So that's it for this video, and thanks for watching.